So if you're in your 20s, you've probably been called a lot of things. In fact, the term millennial came on the scene when you were young and the world anticipated your potential. But now you're the pariah. You're the one that seems to be blamed for everything, from the crash of the housing market to the decimation of the 40-hour work week, and of course to the depletion of the avocado supply. Now, you may be called Generation Z. You're the generation that came after the millennials, and supposedly you're antisocial. You love your phones, and you really haven't grown up yet. Probably on good days, people see you as the savior of the millennials. Now, maybe you haven't been called a label, but maybe people have been asking you questions in your 20s. You have well-meaning parents, or relatives, or well-meaning adults who are dropping you questions like, so when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to settle down and get married? When are you going to get practical? And when are you going to grow up? Now, sometimes these terms and labels can kind of roll off you, but sometimes they sting a little bit. Because after all, you didn't create the world that you're living in. It was handed down to you by your parents' generation, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you're just trying to navigate it. As I talk with a lot of other 20-somethings, I find that sometimes they just want adults to show a little bit more empathy and a little bit more understanding. Now, in the future modules, we'll talk about empathy, but for right now, let's focus in on the understanding portion. In my work, I try to spend time trying to understand the journeys of those who are navigating their third decade of life. And what I have found is that a lot of times as these terms and as these questions are hitting 20-somethings, that they can begin to internalize it a little bit. Pretty soon they start asking these questions of themselves, or even labeling themselves by what they hear from others, and eventually a question begins to bubble up, and the question is, am I all right? Am I normal? Is there something wrong with me? I'd like to tell you that actually what you're going through is quite normal. And the way that we can think about this is for us to begin to define some of the terms that we're talking about. And as we do that, it can give us terminology and language to actually have honest and good conversation about this. Take, for instance, the definitions that I gave you a little bit earlier about millennial and Generation Z. Now, these terms, generational terms, come from what has been called generational theory. Now, there's a lot of limitations with generational theory, and we don't have time to get into it, but the essence of generational theory has this assumption that when a person grows up through their formidable years, the teens and 20s, whatever's going on in the world, geopolitically, politically, globally, economically, can often have an impact on the way that a person views the world and how they're supposed to interact with it. So if I grew up in my formidable years through the Great Depression, perhaps it has an impact on the way I think about money, or the way I think about savings, or the way I think about scarcity or abundance. If I grew up during the Vietnam War, perhaps it has shaped the way I think about politics, or the ways that I think about the way countries go to war with other countries. If I grew up in a post-9/11 world, perhaps I remember the experience of shifting from just doing fire drills to having to do lockdowns, and it's changed my perception of what I think about terrorism. If I grew up in my formidable years through a pandemic, perhaps it's reminding me of the vulnerability in my own life, in my family's life, and in the world's life, the way things work. So what generational theory does in many ways is it gives us a chance to give a snapshot of the way people have experienced the world through a particular time, a formidable time in their lives. Now, that's not the only way that we need to think about this. We can also think about millennials and Gen Z when it comes to just how old they are. So a millennial traditionally, as we think about it, has been born from 1980 up to about 2000. There's a little bit of debate if it's 1995 or 2000. So right now, a millennial is 20 to 40 years old. Generation Z has been born 1995, 2000, up to present day, so they're anywhere from up to 20 to 25 years old. You'll notice that these generational cohorts overlap over the 20-year-old decade. But these are more sociological or cultural terms. There's probably another way that we can think about the 20s, and that's really through a developmental lens. And researchers have called this emerging adulthood. Now, emerging adulthood is the period between adolescence as someone finds their way toward adulthood, and it's usually designated between the ages of 18 and 29. Now, what's interesting about 18 is that you've probably even felt this, that up to 18, you were under the tutelage of a parent or a legal guardian. Your choices were quite limited to going to school and doing the rhythms that teenagers do. But all of a sudden at 18, upon graduation, the world has opened up to you. You have more options, you have more possibilities. Perhaps after graduation, you decide you want to join the military, or you want to take a gap year, or you want to go to college, or you want to work at a trade. Or maybe you want to do all of them in different forms, right? The possibilities for you have opened up in dramatic ways. And at the same time, as we talk with emerging adults, we find that they have age 30 as this internal marker. By 30, most of those in their 20s want to have some sort of traction with the vocation or job that they're pursuing. They want to have some sort of investment in significant relationships, whether that's a life partner or a community that they really want to invest in. And they also want to make independent decisions that guide the choices that they make. Some would call that a worldview, or maybe it's faith or spirituality or a particular outlook or philosophy on life. People call it different things. And so what people in their 20s are trying to do is to navigate this world from adolescence into adulthood. Well, we find from the research that those that are in this period of emerging adulthood feel this excitement for the options that are available to them. And at the same time, the anxiety to actually navigate these roads. They feel a sense of hope for what might be, and at the same time, a lot of pressure because they feel like they have less support. They have more options than they've ever had before, and an anxiety as well as they think about how they're supposed to choose them. And I don't know what I'm saying after that, so I've got to look.
Very good.
Let's see. Okay, here we go. I'm almost done. So these experiences are so much more than being millennial or being Generation Z. It's actually an experience in this period of emerging adulthood where people are trying to navigate their lives in a world where it takes longer to grow up, in a world where the scripts for how to become an adult are varied and vague, in a world where a lot of times you can feel on your own. Now, some of you, as I describe this, might be thinking, I'm right on track. And others of you might be thinking, I am so far behind. And most of you are thinking, it depends on the day. I'm feeling actually both. Well, that's okay. I think what we want you to know is that the experiences that you're having are not weird. They're not abnormal. They're actually quite normal in your journey. And maybe what you need more than anything else right now is a bit of understanding, to know that your journey is unique, to know that your journey is common, and to know that perhaps through this lens of emerging adulthood, you might have language to unpack your feelings, your aspirations, your hopes, and your challenge. And maybe that's the good news for you today.